5:02 a.m., January 26, 2026. In a strategic stretch of Persian Gulf, where every movement is monitored, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group enters an area with an unusually dense level of surveillance. The surface remains calm, with no alarms, warnings, or visible signs of crisis. No siren sound, no public alerts are issued, and nothing appears out of place to an outside observer. Yet inside the command system, a quiet sequence of signals begins to appear, indicating that the surrounding tactical environment is subtly but steadily shifting. U.S. sensors register the anomaly early. Radar returns lose their steady rhythm, certain radio frequency bands grow noticeably crowded, and tracking algorithms flag small but systematic movements on the water that suggest deliberate coordination rather than coincidence. Now, this is not a direct threat, nor an obvious provocation, but it is enough to confirm that the carrier group is no longer alone in open waters. In this operating space, even minor deviations carry meaning, and almost nothing happens without intent. What stands out most is the absence of any official message from Iran. No statements, no warnings, and no threats circulate through media channels. In a region shaped by rhetoric, that silence becomes more powerful than any declaration. On the surface of the water, a maneuver begins to take shape. It is quiet, controlled, and deliberately restrained, yet clear enough for those watching to understand that it is not random movement, but a calculated act of pressure. From a tactical perspective, this represents the most refined form of confrontation. No gunfire is required, no missiles or naval guns are activated, only a presence measured precisely in distance, timing, and operational tempo. The goal is not collision, but attention. It is designed to force the opposing side to observe closely and weigh every decision, because in environments like this, even a small change in course can be framed as concession. And in that silent moment, before a single shot is fired, a larger question begins to form. If presence alone can generate this level of pressure, what happens when the boundaries of restraint are crossed? Who will be forced to decide first in waters where the smallest mistake could turn pressure into confrontation? If you want to keep following how the United States maintains the upper hand in moments like this, subscribe to the Military Power Channel, because what follows this silence may shape the balance of the entire region. Iran's first gray zone move at sea did not unfold suddenly, but followed a pattern Tehran has relied on for years. A group of small and medium-sized naval vessels, including PACOP Y-class fast attack craft, began moving into the operating area of the U.S. carrier group in the Persian Gulf. These vessels did not resemble a force preparing for full-scale combat, yet they were deployed in sufficient density to create a sense of constant presence. On the surface, they appeared as small, fast-moving, unpredictable contacts, always close enough to draw attention, but never crossing any clear legal boundary. In form, Iran adhered to international maritime law. No vessels cut dangerously across the carrier group's bow, no high-risk close approaches were attempted, and no warning shots were fired. Tactically, however, the maneuver was an unmistakable probe built around psychological pressure rather than collision. The primary objective was not military confrontation, but forcing the U.S. carrier group to weigh every minor decision. In sensitive waters like the Persian Gulf, even slight changes in course or speed can be exploited politically and in the media as signs of reaction under pressure. For that reason, Iran's actions were more performative than genuinely dangerous. The PACOP I-class boats are built for speed and agility, suitable for harassment and presence missions, but they lack the capability to directly challenge a modern navy organized with layered defense and coordination. What Tehran sought was the feeling of space control, even if only at a psychological level. The goal was to create the impression that every U.S. movement was being watched, measured, and steadily pressured through proximity rather than direct force. On the other side, Washington had anticipated this scenario well in advance. The deployment of a carrier strike group, led by USS Abraham Lincoln to the Middle East, was not a spontaneous reaction, but a strategic move made amid escalating tensions with Iran. This group included the aircraft carrier, destroyers, escort vessels, and supporting forces, forming a complete combat structure capable of layered defense, strike operations, and continuous surveillance. That presence allowed the United States to maintain real control rather than symbolic control. While Iran relied on numbers and proximity to simulate encirclement, the United States relied on force structure and coordination. Escort ships protected the perimeter, radar and electronic warfare systems operated continuously, and air wings remained ready for deployment if required. Crucially, the U.S. carrier group did not alter its formation, did not slow down, and did not change course in response to Iranian vessels. Maintaining the planned route sent a clear signal that gray zone pressure would not dictate American decision-making. Iran, meanwhile, continued issuing hardline verbal warnings. Tehran stated that any attack against it would be treated as full-scale war and met with severe retaliation. Yet the gap between rhetoric and action remained evident throughout the encounter. These statements were aimed largely at deterrence and domestic morale, rather than reflecting readiness for direct naval confrontation. In practice, Iran's movements stayed limited to probing behavior, carefully avoiding steps that could trigger uncontrolled escalation at sea. In the broader picture, this episode reflected two fundamentally different approaches. Iran attempted to generate pressure through constant presence and the optics of proximity, while the United States managed the situation through depth of capability and disciplined consistency. No shots were fired, yet the balance of control became increasingly clear. The U.S. carrier strike group was not merely a symbol of power, but an effective deterrent capable of setting boundaries within a maritime corridor vital to global energy flows. It was within this gunfire-free tension that Washington's strategic message became unmistakable. The United States was not seeking conflict, but it would not accept coercion or allow pressure to redirect its operations or objectives. By maintaining a strong and steady presence, the carrier group transformed gray zone pressure into an advantage in information and control, while Iran's actions gradually became confined to symbolic gestures, loud in appearance but limited in their ability to alter the balance on the water. As the initial phase of contact comes to an end, the waters surrounding the U.S. carrier group do not grow calmer. Instead, they transition into a denser and more deliberate pattern of movement, where activity increases rather than fades, and Iranian vessels no longer appear sporadically. They begin operating in short, repeating cycles, adjusting position every few minutes. Courses shift by only a few degrees at a time, then hold steady, then change again, as some boats drift outward while others slide inward, slowly compressing maneuvering space. Iran implements its so-called soft encirclement through a steady stream of physical actions. Fast attack craft approach from the rear at higher speed, closing distance briefly before easing off throttle, while other vessels hold flanking positions, then peel away to be replaced. From farther out, additional boats move along angled paths, crossing projected approach corridors without entering them, as if probing where invisible boundaries begin. At intervals, multiple Iranian boats alter speed within the same window, creating clusters of simultaneous movement on radar displays. Engines rise in pitch, wakes lengthen briefly, then flatten again as speeds drop. The intent is not concealment, but saturation, adding variables to process and tracks to monitor, repeating hour after hour to stretch attention rather than overwhelm it. The U.S. response does not mirror these movements. The carrier group, led by USS Abraham Lincoln, holds course and speed without visible adjustment, while escort ships maintain assigned stations and no vessel breaks formation to investigate independently. Instead, activity shifts inward. Surface radars extend scan sectors incrementally without increasing emission intensity, while electronic sensors begin sorting contacts by movement style, grouping vessels by acceleration patterns, approach angles, and dwell time near the formation. Above the formation, airborne surveillance continues at a steady rhythm. Aircraft remain at planned altitudes, tracing broad loops rather than sharp turns, avoiding reactive behavior and reinforcing the sense that nothing out of the ordinary is occurring. Each Iranian maneuver is logged in detail. Acceleration timing, deceleration distance, parallel station duration, and diagonal approach geometry are measured, mapped, and compared until individual actions lose uniqueness and form recognizable sequences. Rather than disrupting the impression of encirclement, the United States allows it to persist physically while dissolving it analytically. As Iranian boats spread across directions, the U.S. sensor picture expands in parallel, ensuring no movement escapes observation. When Iranian craft hold distance just inside legal limits, U.S. systems hold that same spacing mathematically, neither reducing nor extending it, preventing pressure from translating into positional change. No maneuver forces adjustment or alters formation logic. As hours pass, the pattern stabilizes. Iranian actions repeat in near-identical cycles of approach, pause, and withdrawal, while the carrier group continues forward on schedule, passing navigation points with formation and tempo unchanged. This interaction never becomes loud, no warnings are broadcast and no shots are fired, yet the contrast sharpens over time as one side expends effort to maintain motion while the other expends effort to remain unchanged. One side relies on activity to generate pressure. The other relies on continuity to absorb it until movements meant to provoke lose urgency and maneuvers designed to test reactions become routine inputs rather than decisive actions. In this silent contest, control does not belong to the side that moves the most, but to the side that moves only when it chooses to and refuses to let motion dictate decision. After many hours of maintaining a controlled close approach posture, the waters around the U.S. carrier group turn into a space of constant motion. Iranian vessels do not remain fixed in any single position. Instead, they rotate in and out, withdrawing briefly before reappearing from different angles. Some approach from behind the formation at higher speed, holding that pace for several minutes to reduce distance, then cutting throttle sharply and easing back out. Others move along diagonal tracks from starboard to port, crossing distant approach lanes before peeling away, as if probing to see when and where a reaction might occur. Several Iranian boats hold position just inside legal limits for extended periods. They run parallel to the U.S. formation at nearly matching speed, neither accelerating nor falling back, stretching the sensation of being shadowed for tens of minutes at a time. At other moments, these same vessels break off, open a brief gap, then return from a new direction, repeating the approach cycle with steady timing. Occasionally, 2 or 3 boats change speed almost simultaneously, creating multiple fast-moving contacts on radar displays within the same short window. Each time this occurs, the U.S. carrier group does not alter its formation. The carrier maintains its original axis of movement. Escort ships, neither close in nor spread out. No warning signals are broadcast over public channels. All adjustments take place inside the system. Surface radars expand their scan sectors toward directions from which Iranian boats most often appear. Tracking sensors prioritize recording trajectories, acceleration points, time spent at higher speed, and withdrawal distances following each approach. When an Iranian vessel accelerates and then decelerates abruptly, that trajectory is logged. When another runs parallel for an extended duration, distance and time are recorded. As similar approaches recur, after intervals of several tens of minutes, recognizable behavioral patterns begin to form. There is no direct countermaneuver, and no U.S. ship breaks formation to shadow individual contacts, yet every movement is tracked continuously and without interruption. Over time, Iranian actions begin to repeat themselves, with short bursts of acceleration followed by rapid slowing. Distant cross-angle approaches are followed by withdrawal. Parallel runs are followed by separation. This sequence plays out repeatedly, with the range of variation gradually shrinking. Meanwhile, the U.S. carrier group maintains the same cruising speed, the same formation, and the same route. There is no adjustment to open greater distance and no move to close in. At certain points, Iranian vessels are forced to adjust their own positioning as spacing between boats within their group begins to change. Some slow down to avoid closing too tightly. Others swing wider before returning to re-establish the familiar, close approach pattern. These internal corrections occur while the U.S. carrier group makes no changes to any navigational parameter. After multiple cycles of this activity, pressure stops increasing. Iranian boats remain present and continue moving, but each new action closely resembles the one before it. By this stage, every trajectory, every acceleration and deceleration pattern, and every maintained distance is already captured within U.S. tracking systems. The operating space around the carrier group becomes increasingly predictable, even as Iranian vessels continue to maneuver. No shots are fired. No dramatic moment unfolds. Yet, as Iranian boats begin repeating the same motions while the U.S. formation holds its original course, the balance on the water quietly shifts. Pressure created through constant movement no longer compels adjustment. With each passing hour, every irritating maneuver becomes another recorded data point rather than a trigger for response. In this seemingly uneventful state, control no longer belongs to the side generating the most movement, but to the side that refuses to let any movement alter its decisions. As the pressure on the surface of the sea begins to ease, the most visible signal still does not come from any statement or announcement, but from a carefully consistent sequence of actions by the U.S. fleet. The USS Abraham Lincoln continues along the same axis of movement established at the beginning of the transit. Engine output remains steady. Navigation headings do not fluctuate. The measured distance between the carrier and its escort ships stays locked within the same tactical envelope that had been set hours earlier. There is no command issued to tighten formation, no signal to relax it, and no maneuver intended to visually indicate that a tense phase has ended. Escort vessels maintain their assigned protective stations without deviation. Destroyers on the outer screen neither drift inward nor widen their arcs. No single ship breaks formation to shadow individual contacts that had previously approached. There is no sudden redistribution of assets, no subtle regrouping, and no visible effort to reorganize the force. Each vessel continues to occupy its place as if nothing out of the ordinary has occurred. Above the formation, aerial patrols remain on their scheduled cycles, tracing wide, predictable loops at altitude. No aircraft descend for closer inspection. No patrol increases its tempo. The air picture remains deliberately unchanged. Across public communication channels, Washington defines nothing. There is no announcement marking the end of an encounter, no warning issued, and no symbolic statement released to frame events. U.S. military authorities publish no images, release no video, and hold no press briefing. The absence of messaging persists not for a short window, but throughout the carrier group's completion of its next operational leg. Silence becomes part of the operational posture, maintained with the same discipline as formation spacing, or navigation speed. On the water itself, activity proceeds in a precise and methodical manner. The fleet passes through each waypoint according to the pre-planned sequence. Timestamps remain intact. Navigation checks align with expected windows. There is no indication that the route has been shortened, rerouted, or adjusted to avoid areas that had recently seen close contact. Instead, the carrier group completes the full transit exactly as designed, under continuous observation, demonstrating that neither timing nor mission flow has been interrupted. No U.S. vessel turns back to generate a confrontational image. No ship surges ahead to create a visible gap. There's no deliberate close approach intended to send a deterrent signal. Nothing about the movement suggests escalation or retaliation. What follows is simply continuity. The same course, the same spacing, the same operational logic that governed the transit before pressure emerged. Throughout this period, Monitoring systems remain fully active, but without visible escalation. Alert levels do not spike. No additional warnings are broadcast on maritime channels. Radar emissions remain consistent. Sensor coverage stays wide, but controlled. The posture is stable, sufficient for observation and awareness, yet carefully calibrated to avoid introducing new friction. This uninterrupted sequence of actions delivers a message more clearly than any declaration could. The U.S. fleet is not compelled to change course. It is not diverted from its original objectives. It is not distracted by non-kinetic pressure designed to test reactions or induce adjustment. Completing the mission exactly as planned demonstrates that tactics based on presence, proximity, and harassment do not alter operations. Crucially, no escalation accompanies this outcome. No warning shots are fired. No weapon systems are displayed. No threatening signals are transmitted. Rather than marking advantage through words, images, or gestures, the United States allows steady movement to communicate control. Each nautical mile covered according to plan becomes a quiet affirmation of who sets the tempo at sea. As the carrier group moves beyond the zone of close contact without disruption, a pattern for future encounters is reinforced. There is no requirement for dramatic response to assert position. No warnings are necessary to preserve initiative. Holding objectives, maintaining tempo, and refusing to let an opponent define the terms of engagement proves sufficient. In the narrow and fragile operating space of the Persian Gulf, that continued movement forward, unbroken, unannounced, and unaltered, becomes the clearest deterrent message of all. What unfolded in these waters highlights an increasingly clear reality of modern warfare. Conflict no longer always begins with missiles leaving their launchers or naval guns opening fire, but with radar switching to active tracking modes, with distances calculated down to the nautical mile, and with decisions that appear simple on the surface, yet carry deep strategic weight, such as refusing to change course or break operational tempo. In an environment where every movement is monitored, it is consistency, not aggression, that creates the decisive advantage. Iran tested the situation through gray zone tactics, relying on continuous presence, flexible approach angles, and prolonged psychological pressure to provoke a response. This is a familiar method, designed to project a sense of control without crossing the threshold into open war. Yet this episode also exposed the limits of that approach when the opponent refuses to be guided by it. When the USS Abraham Lincoln and the U.S. fleet maintained their route, preserved formation discipline, and expanded sensor control, symbolic pressure steadily lost its effect and gave way to real operational dominance. The decisive factor was never the number of ships involved or how closely they approached, but which side managed to preserve its tempo and original strategic objectives. The United States did not need to declare victory, escalate, or display firepower. Through calm and consistency, Washington turned a tense encounter into a test of resolve, where advantage favored the side that understood when to act and when to hold position. This is the model of a new kind of confrontation, where power is expressed not through explosions, but through control of information, space, and decision-making. No shots were fired, yet the entire region remained taut with tension. So in a contest where silence weighs heavier than firepower, who do you believe is truly controlling the game? Subscribe to Military Power, because if what you have just seen remained silent, what comes next may not.